Hello, puppies and kittens. We are. I- I've done a series where I talk to a number of people about why they believe what they do, and I've often said that I don't care what you believe. All that matters is why you believe it. And what is the reason? What is the evidence, the logic, the justification behind it? And on rare occasions, it's happened that maybe somebody would convince me of a position that I didn't already have, but as I said, it's rare. So today I'm talking with somebody that our conversation started on Facebook. It started as a result of some what was this, Ben Shapiro posted something stupid, and I took the bait, and I couldn't help arguing. And he's casting that atheists, that we all have a positive belief in nothing, or the standard thing that you always hear. And I just I took the hook and jumped in, and then suddenly I've got like 1,500 responses and growing immediately. And it's not even possible to respond to everybody. I don't even get the notifications anymore, to direct me to where all these things are coming from. So I don't even have a proper way to respond. But I did arrange with one of those people that we were going to be able to talk about, what he was saying there, because he said that among other things that without God, there's no reason, whether there's no basis for logic, there's no basis for science, there's no basis for truth, all of kinds of stuff. So, Angelos, introduce yourself,
hmm
please. Let people know who you are, and then take a moment or two to make your case.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Aaron, for having me on
It's
here.
RN, please.
Oh, Aaron. Sorry. Well, thank you, Aaron, for having me on here. It's an honor to be able to address you and your followers. And just yeah, thanks for taking the time to invite me on. That was very kind of you. And yeah, I guess you kind of made a number of assertions in your first sort of response to Ben Shapiro. And I basically sort of chimed in there and said, "Oh, I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I'm a urban missionary. I have a master's degree in theological studies, which was an interdisciplinary focus. So my MA focused on theology and the relation between theology and the philosophy of science, and basically the relationship in general of faith and science. So I've been studying epistemology and how those two things work together. And so yeah, I saw your post and I thought it would be interesting to chime in there. And I saw that you kind of made a number of assertions in your initial post. I don't really have it on me right now, but yeah, and I think that sort of created a lot of these posts created a firestorm. So I'm happy to address a lot of what you say and a lot of the assertions that you made on that initial post or in general. I know you have a lot of sort of talking points that I'd love to sort of engage with you on. So thanks for having me.
Well, you had an opening question.
Opening question.
Yeah, just before we hit the button to start
Oh
recording, you
yeah,
said,
yeah. No, I was just curious because I hear a lot about sort of atheists that turn towards Satanism, which obviously doesn't make sense. And so the conclusion that most people give me is that it's not a real sort of. It's more of like an infatuation. It has nothing to do with actual genuine belief in Satan. So I was just like wanting to see if that was true because if you're a materialist, it would be hard to imagine for you to actually have a genuine belief in Satan. But then again, who knows? So I was curious about that.
yeah, Satanists don't believe in Satan. So the
No.
Satanic Temple that was founded in 2013 states in their FAQ, their frequently asked questions, and everything, that they don't believe in a literal Satan. It's a symbolic character, somewhat
Okay.
similar to Uncle Sam or Mother Nature, if you will,
Mm.
something like that. And
hmm
also in the what was it, the Church of Satan in when it was 1966, they have come out and said that they don't believe in a literal Satan either.
Mm.
And there's I don't know if they're as strict about that as the Satanic Temple is, but the reason that I admired the Satanic Temple and their effects on defending the First Amendment for years,
hmm
and I thought that they were doing a better job than mere atheists could. because we don't have, when you're talking about freedom of religion when somebody wants to put up the 10 commandments, if the atheists put up something, what the hell we got, right? We're not even a religion. There's nothing to compete with. But the Satanic Temple, even though they don't have spiritual beliefs at all, they have an assemblage of ethics. And I was surprised that the people that I've met in the Satanic Temple actually do take it seriously. I went to SatanCon and I met a number of people from the Satanic Temple and also from the Church of Satan. And many of these people were lifelong Satanists, and they take their ethics very seriously. And so even though it doesn't meet my definition of a religion, because there's no belief in an afterlife, and that's the core of my, if there's something that's going to qualify as a religion, it would have to have that. And they don't believe that at all. They're like all materialists.
Mhm.
But it's the ethics that holds them together, and I rather admire that. But again, the only
Okay.
reason that I officially joined was so that I could vocally support their efforts in defending the First Amendment, which I think we sorely need. They might have been undercut since we are headed to theocracy now, much the pity. But I'm still in the fight for until the end, I think.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what to say about that because I'm not sure what kind of ethics Satanists can possibly have. And I don't know why, if Satanists don't believe in Satan, they tend to adopt biblical language and talk about a Satan from the Bible, but he's a completely different character. He's some sort of imaginary character. So why do
Yeah.
people still call him Satan then?
The Satan character is actually it was a symbolic character before it got into the Bible. I mean, like Jews don't really have the same kind of classification or character that Christians do, even though they have the same Bible. It's just that Christians interpret it differently. The Satan character Hashatan predates even Judaism. It comes from the Zoroastrian faith, which a number of scholars have said that Judaism owes more to Zoroastrianism than to any other faith in the assemblage when Rabbinic Judaism was coming about, being formed. That they had a number of influences from other religions in neighboring regions, and mostly from Zoroastrianism. But when Christianity formed, they reached past Judaism and took something else from Zoroastrianism that Judaism did not adopt, and that was, I think it was the Hadnak Nask from the Vestas of Zarathustra, where they said that the righteous man upon his death will ascend to the kingdom of justice and truth under the good Lord Ahura Mazda, and that the evil man would descend into the kingdom of the lie, ruled by Ahriman the opposer. And the opposer is the word translated to the original language is Hashatan. That's the Satan, the Satan. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the opposer. And then in the Christian interpretation, the opposer seems to be whoever opposes faith, just opposing faith in general. And I see faith as being the absolute most dishonest position it is possible to have. Faith is the reason every religion is wrong. That's the
So
problem with it. So
yeah, so you
what?
think Zoroastrianism, there's actually credible evidence to that anything actually that we have actually dates back to Zoroaster?
Yeah, as I said, there's a number of biblical scholars, rabbinic scholars, who say that I've read that the formation of Judaism owes more to Zoroastrianism than to any other influence.
Yeah, that doesn't yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I mean,
Why not?
Zoroastrianism is a completely different worldview, and it's not monotheism. It's sort of a dualist world system, and
How
you
is it
can't
not
really date.
monotheism?
You can't really date any of the actual information. It's like Buddhism, right? The first kind of any inclination of any sort of literature that we have relating to the actual life of Buddha comes hundreds of years later. You can talk to Zoroastrian scholars, and it's a fog, right? There's nothing that you can actually really pinpoint that can get back to the actual person of Zoroaster. Anything is pretty foggy, whereas the biblical literature goes back to 1400 BC, right? So
No,
um,
it doesn't.
yeah, well, we can talk about chronology if you want,
Yeah.
but that's what the Bible clearly says, and that's
I
what the
had the good fortune
yeah
to talk to a number of biblical scholars, and they don't. There's
yeah.
not a bit of the Bible that is that old.
There's not a what? Sorry.
There's not a bit of the Bible that is that old.
Actually, it actually tells you the exact
I think
year.
the oldest book of the Bible, according to one of the people that does my Bible lessons, he
Hmm.
says it's Hosea, and
That's
I
not true
forget
at
what date
all.
he. Oh,
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
okay.
Typically, Job is considered the oldest book in the Bible,
It
but the
used to be.
contents.
It
Yeah.
used to be,
Well.
but now they realize that it can't be as old as was originally said, because of elements that are in it. It's like when they gave me the Bhagavad Gita, and they told me that it was 5,000 years old, except that Krishna is
Right.
making reference to Ionian Greeks
Right.
there, which puts that the context of that has to be the 7th century BC, much like everything else, much like Zoroaster and Buddha. Have you noticed the 7th century BC? Like everything, all these religions started,
Yeah, it's called the
around there.
axial age for a reason, right? That's when all these different worldviews came about. But the Pentateuch itself, you can find scholars who believe all sorts of things, but the claim within the text itself is that it goes back to the 15th century BC, and there's lots of evidence to back that up as well. So
Okay, well, I can't say there's lots of evidence to back that up because as I said, I've interviewed a number of biblical scholars, and they say no, it's not.
well,
So they're,
I'll let you in on a little secret. I just graduated from an esteemed sort of Bible college, and I've sort of met a lot of the guys that write our commentaries and things like that. And a lot of Bible scholars don't even believe in the Bible anymore. So I
yeah,
actually find philosophers and historians to be much more genuine than a lot of Bible scholars today. So I wouldn't take what Bible scholars tell you. There's only a handful of actual genuine Bible scholars that will give you sort of the real details around the text. Most biblical scholarship is sort of inundated with liberal ideas that have sort of a bias against any sort of conservative interpretation.
I
So
don't
yeah,
think I don't think you want to bring in liberal or conservatism into the Bible. I mean, certainly not as a Christian, right?
yeah. Maybe I'm not talking in a political context. I'm talking about in a hermeneutical context. So I don't know. Are you familiar with the Tübingen School and anything to do with like Rudolf Bultmann or any of these 19th century biblical scholars that basically paved the way for secularization in the 19th century?
No, what I was referring to was that Jesus was himself very left wing, and he seems to have been completely abandoned by American Christians in the modern age.
Well, Jesus never fit into any sort of political mold, right? There's some of his teachings that you could say are left wing because they tend to focus more on compassion and humanitarian issues, and
You're supposed
other.
to give your money to the poor, to
Yeah,
feed the
exactly.
immigrants, yeah,
Right.
and that a rich man cannot get into heaven. You're supposed to give away all of your money for the poor, and
Yeah.
try to tell that to the American right wingers now.
Yeah. Well, I can't speak for the American right wingers, but I know that biblically and historically, Christians, when we're called to go back to the text and follow the Lord, that's what we're commanded to do, is put others above ourselves and to honor God with our riches. And you're right that material possessions, it's very clear in Scripture that that's a snare. That's something that's not good, right? James talks about the contrast between the rich who are basically not in a good position in God's eyes and the poor who are highly favored in God's eyes. So yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we've done an introduction,
Hmm.
but we haven't said much of anything yet.
Right.
So you said you at one point accused me of making baseless assertions. I state that
Right.
I do not make baseless assertions. I've got reasons behind everything that I
Hmm.
say. And if I'm challenged on any of these particular things, if the challenge is warranted, then I will go through the effort to pull up the sources and whatnot.
For
But
sure.
I don't make baseless assertions.
I think you made a number of them in your initial post. I don't have it before me, but
Okay, well, I
yeah.
didn't, because I don't do that.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that you asserting anything is baseless from a materialist point of view. That was my original point.
Let's talk about a materialist point of view for a moment. Do you believe that there are such things as atoms?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you accept that there is a material universe?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so you and I both accept that there is a material universe.
Right.
The difference between us is that I don't also assume a magical alternative to this reality. There is the reality that we both accept that is real, and then you assume an alternate universe that I do not assume. That's materialism. You're making an assumption that I'm not.
Sorry, you just said anything that's not material is magic. Is that what you just claimed?
If you use the word supernatural, you could replace that word with either magical or imaginary, and probably not much affect the meaning of the sentence.
Yeah, well, that's semantics. But are you saying that nothing that's immaterial exists?
What is immaterial? Give me an example.
Well, truth, for example, is truth a real objective reality?
The truth is what the facts are, right? So by definition, the truth is any facts that are concordant with reality. So there you
But
go.
but
Yeah.
it but is truth a mind independent uh, phenomena? Is it something that is real, regardless of whether we think truth is real or not?
Well, if the truth is going to be a fact, and the fact has to be real, right?
So you're
It has
saying
to
that
be.
truth only exists within material things? Is that what you're saying?
Can you? Yeah, I mean, you're going to say, you're going to suggest that perhaps a word is immaterial because there's a concept attached to it, but the concept has a reality to it too.
Hmm.
Are we? If you want to come up with an abstract concept, how does that imply supernatural? I mean, like, the Bible has in it a number of examples of the supernatural. Like every kind of magic is in there. There's the golem spell. There's talismans, or excuse me, the elemental spells, necromancy, the incantation, the elemental spells where they use what they originally called the five elements. You know, with earth, fire, air, and all of that, and even blood magic rituals of a wand in Leviticus 14. So I mean, you have all of these, like the army of the undead, and you have potions and curses and blessings and all of this kind of stuff, and even water bending, but and wizards and witches and sorcerers and all of this kind of stuff. Magic, Lord of the Rings. I don't believe in that. Can you give me an example of that?
I think you're sort of transposing your modern sort of understanding of fantasy novels and things, and you're sort of looking at the Bible because that seems, generally speaking, you seem like the kind of guy who's interested in fantasy novels and Lord of the Rings and things like that. And I think you're looking at the Bible and
I
you're
don't.
considering.
I don't read. I don't read. The only fiction I ever read was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and a couple of other things. But I don't really have a taste for it. So
Okay, well, I can tell you that the Bible does include something of the nature of magic, but it's in a derogatory sense, right? There are
the golem spell,
supernatural
where God creates Adam, is that
golem spell.
derogatory? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think any biblical anybody living it in the biblical context would ever even, they wouldn't know what that is, and they probably wouldn't think of the creation of Adam in that
Yeah.
sense.
Rabbinical scholars have declared that Adam was a golem. That
A
the
golem.
construction of Adam was a demonstration of the golem spell. So this
Okay.
was in the old
Are
Semitic
you talking
magic
about
of the
Talmudic scholars and people who are involved in the occult and
the
things like
people
that?
who wrote the book. Yeah.
Okay, well, Moses wrote the book, right? So I don't
Moses
think
didn't
any.
exist. So
Okay,
people wrote the book, but those people were not Moses, because Moses wasn't
right.
real.
So what evidence do you have that Moses didn't write the book?
Moses wasn't real.
And what
First off,
evidence do you have that Moses wasn't real?
we have all of these other stories that are now attributed to Moses that were actually attributed to, or that already were going on with real people from earlier times. Like the spell in the water was originally done by Judgmonk, his mage actually, but that was 1,000 years earlier than the time attributed to Moses. and it was the story was a little bit more laughable than parting of the Red Sea, but there it is. You have the same sort of a thing that was already going on in the same culture at the same time, and had already been going on for a long time before that.
Sorry,
Then
what historical evidence do you have that the story of Moses, that Moses was not a real person? Because you made a pretty strong claim there, and just claiming that there was another story of some, I don't know what that was.
That's one example,
right?
And then another one would be that the Ten Commandments is itself a compilation of multiple sets of other laws from other traditions, and one of them being the inspiration for that being the Stela of Law from Hammurabi, which was culturally very similar and close by, and also centuries earlier again. And some of the commandments that you have in Exodus 20, 21, 22, 23 are actually lifted from the Stela Law Code. So it's not even original. Why would God copy someone else's work?
Okay,
and then, of course, the Exodus, and this is the thing, archaeologists and again, rabbinical scholars and so forth, they've come out and admitted there's no evidence at all that the Exodus happened the way it is described, and nor could it have, really, because we're talking about 40 years to walk what would take 2 weeks, a distance 2 weeks, following a coastline. You follow the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, you're there. From Ramses to Canaan, 2 weeks, not 40 years. And there's a whole lot more that's wrong with it, too. I mean, Moses writing about his own death and writing about where he's buried, I mean, that's just what we should start with, right? But the fact that all of these collective scholars have pretty much abandoned the idea of there being a historical Moses, and I'm not going to be the one that says, well, that I'm saying that there's no Moses. I'm saying that the world's biblical scholars say that there's no Moses. The historians and so forth, they say there's no Moses.
Yeah, there's lots of historians, there's lots of archaeologists, there's lots of scholars that believe there's a literal Moses. And the fact that similar laws were around at the same time and culture.
And previously, not just at the same time, they were previously. Then you also have the contradictions, where Moses supposedly...
Wait, let's get back to the other thing you said, which is that it took 40 years for the Israelites to travel a distance which would normally take 2 weeks.
And there's much more wrong with it than that. Because if you look at the numbers that are given down in the Bible, the numbers of people the numbers of Hebrew slaves that were in Ramses for the beginning of this conquest, it was like 150,000 young men, and then you add to that the elderly and the women and the children and all of that. But just look at the number of people that were already there. I think that they were talking about like 2 million slaves at a time when the entire country of Egypt would have only had 3.5 million people total across the entire country. So I'm sorry, no, the Hebrews with those kind of numbers, they would own the place.
It seems like you haven't even read the text, Aaron, sorry, because everything you're saying is actually described in the text. All the accusations that you're making, the Bible clearly says that God commanded the Israelites not to enter the Promised Land for 40 years. That He commanded them to wander around the wilderness.
He also said
because
that
it was a judgment.
Clear the Promised Land from those filthy Canaanites that were already occupying the place. So there's too many.
But you just used a flat out false example to describe why Moses wasn't real, which when the text actually gives you a perfect explanation is because the Israelites sinned against God and didn't trust Moses, that the command was, you're not going to enter the Promised Land, only your children were. That's why He made them wander around in the wilderness for 40 years. And that was your example that Moses wasn't real?
Yeah, that was one of them. There are several.
And similar
let's not forget, we know
laws.
for certain that the Adam and Eve story didn't happen.
You know that for certain, do you? Were you a witness to that?
Yes,
were you a witness to that?
I'm a witness to that. You don't have a witness to that, but we do have all of the evidence that proves that didn't happen.
All right, let's hear some of the evidence then.
Evangelical geneticist Francis Collins, for example, who is the director of the National Institutes of Health.
Institute for Health, yeah.
Yeah, he was previously the director of the Human Genome Project.
Yeah.
And in one of his books, he comes out and explains that we know that the Adam and Eve could not have existed. It was not possible for there to have been a population of only 2 people and then from all of humanity to be derived from that. It's not genetically possible. Adam and Eve, he said, unfortunately, do not fit the evidence. And
Yeah.
that's from a geneticist. Now you can go from
So-
anybody else.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do you want to know what secular geneticists also say about population genetics? If you
Does
look
it
at the
matter?
mitochondria, oh, yeah, it does actually, because it's quite interesting. If you
It's
look at the
quite interesting that we know that Adam and Eve did not happen. We
okay,
know for certain that the flood of Noah did not happen. The Tower of Babel did not happen.
okay. Can you answer me one question though? Why do secular geneticists tell us that if we take the mitochondrial mtDNA at face value, it looks like the human population goes back to a single woman around 6,000 years ago?
Because it doesn't. If you
That's
take the averages,
their research.
it
That's
really
what they
doesn't.
tell you.
No,
I can
that's
quote it
not what
for
they
you.
tell you. Look up the study and look what they're talking about. They're talking about the range of mutations, the fastest possible and the slowest possible. If they go to the fastest possible range, then the first mitochondrial Eve could have been 6,000 years. But when you're talking about a range, then you're talking about in the middle. So not 6,000 years, not 200,000 years, somewhere in the middle between 6,000 and 200,000. And it's not just one mitochondrial Eve. There's a sequence of them.
No, it's one mitochondrial Eve.
No, it's not just one mitochondrial Eve. There is a sequence of them.
No,
So
it's a point of uniformity.
One of the mitochondrial Eves accounts for everybody in Europe, for example, and another mitochondrial Eve accounts for, I can't remember it. I'm sorry, it's been a number of years, but there's like 6 of them in sequence. And then, of course, the Y chromosome Adam, which is in a completely different time span. He's about 150,000 years back. So no, not 6,000 years. We know better than that.
Okay, let's read this to you then. What this says here. It says, in addition to the parallelisms mentioned above, mitochondrial DNA datasets often exhibit anomalous patterns. One of these anomalies is the discrepancy between mitochondrial DNA mutation rates observed in evolutionary timescales. If the high mutation rates seen in the human pedigrees were used to calculate the age of our most recent female common ancestor, she would have lived just
recent female common ancestor.
Because that's the point of uniformity that they can go back to.
Of them, there wasn't just one.
And look, this isn't the only study.
There's one. So
yes, there is only one study because they can't accept that there was one Eve.
Most recent means there's other ones that are older than that, right? That's what most recent means.
No, no, it's because they're not allowed to say that there was only one woman. They have to say there was multiple lines of transmission. But the most recent common ancestor, the point of uniformity, which they're basing their
PhD Tony says, I'm a professional scientist and paleo sea level is my specialty. The application of geochronological techniques, your guest, is flat out wrong. Sorry. You read a paper that said that talked about the most recent, and I already said that that's what they were saying. And if you use the fastest mutation rate, you could get to that for the most recent one. You said there was only one. I said there was a sequence. The paper you're reading says there was a sequence.
Right.
So we know that Adam and Eve never happened. We know that it's based on earlier stories, that there are a lot of earlier stories that go back a long way. If you study the archaeology of anywhere, talk to the archaeologist that studies that area, and you will discover very quickly that they have artifacts going back tens of thousands of years for practically anywhere in the world.
Okay, we're touching on like 10 different issues at the moment, but I'll just ask you a simple question, right? First of all, I'd like to preface the question by saying that evolutionary biologists are not allowed to admit anything that resembles sort of a biblical chronology within their studies. They would be laughed out. Yeah. Huh. So let me just preface that. Here's the question.
Can I get documentation that we're not allowed to admit this?
Sure. Yeah, I can send that to you for sure.
Where is the prohibition that we're not allowed to admit?
Well, here's the prohibition. Here's the prohibition. I'll explain it to you. Yeah. Why do a number of mitochondrial studies and Y chromosome studies tell us that if we take the information at face value, it looks like our DNA, our mitochondrial DNA and our Y chromosome DNA only goes back to 6,000 to 10,000 years at the most. And it goes back to the point of uniformity.
Not at the most.
Yes, at the most.
No, not at the most. I said at the beginning of this, It depends on how you measure this. You have the fastest rate and the slowest rate, and then you have a very wide range. Now you can, if you do the fastest rate of mutations, you could get up to 6,000 years on one particular study. That same study also concludes that we are out of Africa still. And the same people that are touting that study are angry because they don't want to be out of Africa, because they want to argue for something else.
Okay.
But we already explained that there's a range there, and you're ignoring that. And so you're ignoring an awful lot to keep this up.
No.
I asked you for the prohibition where we are not allowed to admit when something lines up with the Bible. Show me, because you're wrong. That's just flat out wrong. Yes, we are allowed to admit if something lines up with the Bible. Of course we are.
No.
No, there is no prohibition on that.
Yeah.
And
why do they have to filter the study? Why do they
don't have to filter the study?
Yeah, they do. They admit it in their studies. Yeah,
no,
I can give you citations.
Show me. Where's the filter of the study?
Yeah, let's look at the Y chromosome. Let's look at the Y chromosome study.
Where is the filter of the study?
Well, they admit that they have to run it through multiple filters to get an age that is consistent with evolutionary.
Where is the prohibition that we can never, that evolutionary biologists can never admit when something lines up with the Bible? Where is that bullshit you just shat out of your face?
It is an unspoken
You are lying
thing.
here. I'm calling you out. Where is that prohibition that says that we? Where is the document that says that we cannot admit when something lines up with the Bible? It's not
a written legal document, but it's an
not
unspoken document
at all. It's your,
so are you telling me that creation scientists aren't getting fired from universities for believing in creation or teaching creation?
I would
or
say
pointing to the data that says looks like Adam and Eve might be real?
I would say that creation scientists, people who pretend to be scientists and they're advocating for creationism because of the way they have to fudge their numbers, could likely be fired for doing that. I've seen plenty of that, because
creation scientists are getting fired.
Depends on misinformation, frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. There is not one actual fact. Nothing. Never has been one actual fact that we can both show to be true and indicative of your position. Not one. Never has been.
Well, again, that's a strong claim. But let's go back.
You're trying to pretend that there is data supporting creation. There isn't. And you're trying to pretend that when somebody shows this data that doesn't exist, that they will be kicked out because they have forbidden knowledge. No, that's paranoid conspiracy theory.
Okay,
crap.
First of all,
not a bit of it is true.
Aaron, creation scientists are getting fired. That is a fact.
I'm glad.
Or
they should go do real science and quit lying to people.
And they are telling people that the reason they're getting fired is because they believe that Darwinism is wrong.
Of course, the liars
and
are
these
lying.
are
What a big damn surprise!
These are accredited, top-notch, top-tier scientists. Okay, they're not quacks.
Snelling, for example, who himself personally dated the Kungora Basin in the billions of years, and he shows all of the studies on how he did it, all the different methods that he used to date this formation in the billions of years old. Simultaneously, he's writing articles for the organization that will become Answers in Genesis, where he says that everything is caused by the flood. He knows better than that. He doesn't show any data for how he comes to the flood assumption, because there is no data for that. He does show data when he's doing real geology. Now, at some point, these people want to make believe. I don't know why. So occasionally you have somebody that just turns their back on science and they do creation. But the point is, there is not, and never has been, one actual fact that we can show is both true and indicative of creation. None, never has been, never was. I have a volume of facts and evidence for evolution from many different fields of study, and you will not be able to contest any of them, and you have nothing to support creationism. And I mean nothing.
Yeah, I have lots, but you won't accept it.
You have nothing.
Plain and simple.
Okay, I called you out twice. You've made a bunch of empty assertions on things.
You didn't call out anything. You cut me off while I was telling you how creation scientists. I asked you a simple question: are creation scientists getting fired? And you disguised your answer by saying they're teaching fake science. Well, how do you know they're teaching fake science?
Because creationism is fake science by
definition. You're not the arbiter of what is science and what is not science, are you?
Kitzmiller v. Dober. They determine.
And that's not and Kitzmiller v. Dober is not the arbiter either. The judge copied everything from the ACLU, typos and all. That was a sham. That was a sham
Excuse me,
trial.
no. The judge ruled on each of the claims that Behe made that were falsifiable and had in
He
fact
literally
already been,
copied.
and Behe had already been disproved on every one of his allegations before they even went to court. So present your one fact that is indicative of creationism, because you don't have many. You have nothing.
Yeah, I have lots.
I can give you a list.
Okay,
Of
I
the
just
things
I
that
just
I
showed
have.
you that mitochondrial DNA at face.
Yes,
You
if
tried
you
to discuss.
misread the data and you
Sure.
ignore where it says most
Okay.
recent, and you ignore where it talks about the range, and you ignore everything else that you need to, then
No.
you can eventually kind of squint your eyes and stand on a chair with your head
No.
on sideways and maybe assume it's creation.
No.
But you don't have anything that is actually true
Okay.
and indicative of your position. Nothing.
Okay. Yes, I obviously know there's different ranges, there's different mutational speeds, but the study, and there's multiple studies that say this, is that if we take the data at face value, the mutational rates of mitochondria look like humans only go back 6,000 years.
Do you know why I'm familiar with this study that you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm sure, because it says that Adam and Eve were real. That's why.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it
I'm
does.
familiar with no, it doesn't. I'm familiar with the study because I had a live discussion with Pastor Bob Anyart, and I got him.
Doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter. You can
I
read the
know,
study.
I know it doesn't matter what I'm going to say.
And there's
because
multiple studies.
You already know what I'm going to say before I say it. But I had the conversation with this guy, and I got him to agree to a written debate. I tried to get you to do a written debate, but you wouldn't do it. And I told you the reason
because it takes a lot of time, and I work full time.
Bullshit doesn't fly in a written debate. If you want to cite a study, and Enyart did, he cited a handful of studies. He said, this study says this study says this study says this. But in a written debate, I was able to read all of those studies. And you know what? Hey, none of them said what he said they did. All of them said the opposite. Funny thing how that works. So that's why I say we should do written debates. Again, you don't have a fact that supports creation. And what you do have is volumes of proof that the planet is way older than 6,000 years. Any archaeologist, any anthropologist, any geologist, everybody everywhere can show you reasons why the Earth is older than that.
Yeah.
So you have to ignore an awful lot to pretend that this fairy tale is true. And it is a fairy tale. It's just a story about cursed fruit and talking snakes. We know that the story is a parable. It's metaphorical. It is talking about a choice between that you can stay in the garden, you can live as you can be one of the animals and just remain the way you are. And if you eat of the fruit of the tree of life, then you'll live forever. And if you eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, then you can never go home again. You have become like unto the gods. It's the same story that we get from Pandora's box, Prometheus, and so forth, because these are all coming at about the same time. They're all borrowing from each other. It's a metaphor. We know that didn't happen. But look at the way the Christians interpret it.
So I think the initial reason that I commented on your reply to Ben Shapiro, and this is what I said, is that you make baseless assertions. And within the last 5 minutes,
you say a whole bunch.
So you don't let me finish. That's the problem. You cut me off constantly, right?
Okay. So
maybe I could talk for a minute. And the reason I say you make baseless assertions is because you make very strong claims that even you can't verify from your own personal experience. So you said Moses wasn't a real person.
Because I can.
So how in the world can you verify that Moses wasn't a real person? Even if the Bible stories weren't true, how can you, in your right mind, with a straight face, tell me Moses wasn't a real person?
By going through a consensus of historians.
No, that's a baseless assertion, right?
If the consensus of the scientific community is that, then that is the evidence.
And here's the other thing that you don't take into account. The other thing that I'd like to at least get out of my breath at least once is that you seem to be completely unaware of your own presuppositions and biases when it comes to wrestling with what the data may actually tell us. Because I'm telling you, you don't have any biases, then you must be a robot. Because everybody has biases.
Because I try to minimize biases as much as I possibly can.
Well, sometimes you can't even see your own biases.
Religion is a bias by definition. But but science has a practice to try to minimize and eliminate biases whenever possible.
So are you saying, science has lots of biases too, as well, right? That's why there's actually a lot of persecution.
Religion is a bias by definition, religion is a bias, and science is a method to minimize or eliminate bias.
Okay, I'll address that point after. But to get back to my original point, when we were talking about the studies that tell us if we take the data at face value, it points to a point of uniformity, mitochondrial uniformity. That's one person, and you can sort of dress that up and say that's our most recent common ancestor. The thing is, we don't have any evidence of anything before that, right? We only have evidence of that.
We have all kinds of evidence of things before.
No, we
that.
don't.
And even from
That's the only mitochondrial DNA that we can study, is that most recent common ancestor.
No.
There is nobody else that we can study.
Yes,
right?
There is.
Who? What other than our most recent common ancestor?
What's that?
So,
sorry, what?
From what I know is that our mitochondria goes back to a point of uniformity, one person.
But it isn't.
Right?
And it says that in the study that you misread and that I've already pointed out to you and you still don't get it.
Well,
most recent ancestor means there were other ancestors before her.
Okay.
You understand that, right?
And this is my point.
That's the most recent one, meaning that there's earlier ones.
This is my point, is that the studies, regardless of what they say, they have to dress it up in an evolutionary timescale. Right? Because
they don't. If the data
they do.
They don't. They don't. You're making shit up again. That is a lie. You have said something is true that you cannot defend because it's not true.
It's a well-known.
There is no prohibition. There is no requirement that we dress things up or that we write prop. If you were writing apologetics, if you're working for Answers in Genesis, there is an actual document you have to sign that you will never contradict the Bible. You have to put your signature on it. They have to approve this. It's online. You can look it up. I could show it to you. So the religion apologetics does do what you're saying that the science do, but scientists don't do that. That is a prohibition against science would not even allow that because it is unethical. So you are making a false accusation of something science would not do.
Okay, I will just state something very clearly. There are many hundreds.
Everything else you've said so far has been.
There are many scientists, and this is not a hidden fact, that there are many scientists that when they study the data for themselves, they come to the conclusion Darwin was wrong. When they do this, let me finish. Because you cut me off.
I'm sorry, it's my show. I'm going to cut you off because you're wrong again. There are not many scientists. There's 0.1%, 0.14% of Earth and life sciences that take creationism seriously. Out of all of the scientists that were in the document that you're talking about, and the subsequent what was the estimate on the number of scientists that were doing this kind of work? I can't remember what the data is. I would have to look it up. So study from 1987. But no, 99.86% of geologists, biologists, and so forth accept evolution. Less than 1%, almost 1/10 of 1%, believe in creationism, and they always do that exclusively for reasons of prior indoctrination. There is not a fact that you can point to that is both true and indicative of your position. Not one.
Okay, can I talk for at least a minute and explain what I'm trying to say?
If you say something that's as bald-faced wrong as most of the things you've said so far, I'm going to jump in. So go ahead and try.
Why did you invite me on your show then? If you're just going to jump in and not let me answer anything?
Because you said a bunch of stupid shit on the.
I didn't say anything stupid. I'm giving you actual
said that
information.
Without God, there is no basis for logic, truth, science, right and wrong, etc.
Yes, and you haven't even asked me about that. You didn't even let me explain that.
That was the purpose of you being on here, but you changed the subject. Okay, I'm going to go where you lead.
So did you? Yeah, there's multiple philosophers, even atheist philosophers, naturalist philosophers that say what I just told you. And by your metrics, that was a load of bullcrap, right? But you're going to call all these famous philosophers and biologists who agree with me.
What are you talking about?
Do you know? Okay, let's read some quotes to you then.
Statistics for geologists and biologists.
Sure, that's a completely different issue. I was talking about the situation.
That's why I'm wondering why you're talking about this now.
Right, because you brought it up. I'm showing you your own metrics are not worthy to be trusted in terms of what is bullcrap and what is not bullcrap, right? Because you're telling me I'm spouting nothing but bullcrap, but what you're calling my bullcrap is actually, very commonly well thought of in philosophical and academic circles. So
you say that a lot, but you can't throw any numbers to back that up.
sure,
And
I can give
when
you
said many
influential.
scientists, we often hear that that scientists are turning away from Darwinism. That is a lie that's been going around for more than 100 years. But every statistic, and I do follow these, every statistic shows otherwise. That there are fewer and fewer scientists who accept creationism or who even believe in a God anymore. There's only about like a third of scientists believe in a God at this point.
Sure. Okay, you know who Antony Flew is, right?
Yes.
Okay.
A guy
And
who was duped by a really bad argument from intelligent design while he was suffering from dementia and shortly died thereafter.
okay. The reason I bring up Antony Flew is because he's a paradigmatic figure, right? And today we don't interpret scientific ideas through statistics roughly. There's a lot of talk about paradigms, and maybe you should read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions if you don't quite understand what I'm talking about.
Why are you pretending that I don't understand?
Because you seem to think that
I see you
presuppositions.
as a child arguing with an obstetrician that the obstetrician should teach stork theory. That's what I'm seeing here. Okay.
Sure.
You have no idea. You believe things that are not supported. You are spouting numbers that are not correct. You are not understanding the studies you're citing, but you're telling the same old lies we've heard thousands of times. That many scientists are walking away from Darwin. No, they're fucking not. The statistics are against you. If this was a written discussion, I would be able to show the data. And if this was a written discussion, you would be just making the same assertion and not being able to defend it because there is no data to support you.
Okay, let's address your claim there, because you're saying statistically it doesn't look like many scientists are turning away. And you could be correct. But what I'm telling you is that many scientists are turning away from Darwinism. And that's a fact.
I know that you're telling me something that is not supported by any actual data. You're giving me an assertion.
Okay, well, let's just say there's 10,000 scientists. What constitutes many in your eyes? Because I can list hundreds of scientists for you that have turned away from Darwinism. Does that count as many, or would 10,000 count as many?
A few hundred. You could list a few hundred that signed to the document that you're talking about.
I'm not even talking about the document.
I know what document you're talking about.
I'm not even referring to that document.
The document that you're referring to about the many scientists.
I'm not referring to that document.
Then you have no data at all. You're just
I'm not speaking statistically. I am telling you culturally and anecdotally that many. Now you can put a number to that word if you want, but I'm telling you that
10,000. No,
I said how much would be many for you, right? Because I'm telling you that many scientists are turning away from Darwinism and they are losing their jobs because of it. Now, it's up to you to constitute how many is many, but I'm telling you that it's at least in the hundreds of influential teachers. Okay?
Not.
No.
Not.
Right.
Yep.
Sure.
So you have not hundreds, certainly not the thousands that you mentioned before, that are not turning away from Darwinism. The thing that originally inspired the story that you're talking about now was a document that was asking if people were skeptical of Darwinism. No. And being phrased that way, well, of course, every scientist says that they're going to be skeptical because they're going to be skeptical of practically everything. And there was a whole lot of people that were not scientists. They were medical doctors. They were mathematicians or whatever. These were people not even scientists, but they were touted as the 700 some odd scientists that were walking away from Darwinism. That's where you're getting your figures from. You don't realize it, but that's where it's coming from. And it's not true.
Like I said, I'm not using figures. I'm not using
several
figures.
People on that document, when they realized their names were on there, tried to get their names off.
Again, it's like you're not hearing me. I'm not referring to that document.
I know that you don't think you do. It's like you're not hearing me. I've already clarified. I know that you don't realize what you're talking about. But that is what you're talking about.
I am talking about a cultural movement that I have studied. Okay? It is not, I'm not referring to a statistic. I'm talking about a cultural, sociological movement of scientists.
Anecdotal, no statistics, no data to support it.
This is something that even your evolutionist friends will have to study that they can study from an evolutionist point of view.
Since you don't have any.
There are many scientists that are documenting the intelligent design movement. And you may not be able to put some statistics to it, But I can tell you there are many paradigmatic figures, people who are influential in their circles, who are
But you don't
choosing,
have any
after
data to
reviewing the
show.
data, to point to
You
intelligent
were
design.
criticizing me for making baseless assertions, and you have no data to show what you're saying. That's the definition of a baseless assertion.
No, no, you're not even listening to
Factual
what I'm
statement
saying.
is the factual statement is that more and more scientists are walking away from religious belief entirely. That's the factual statement.
Sure, and I'll agree with you. There is a movement towards the nuns demographic. Yeah, I'll agree with you. Let's agree on some common facts here, because you seem to be ignoring what I'm trying to tell you here. Is that there are scientists.
If I'm
Let me just
understanding it and I'm showing you the problem with your argument, that's not ignoring it.
okay. Let me bring up one scientist, and you probably know of him, Gunter Beckley. Are you familiar with Gunter?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, he was a paleontologist at the Natural History Museum of Stuttgart in Germany.
Okay.
Okay, he's got like 100 and something peer-reviewed papers under his belt.
Okay.
It was the 150th anniversary of Darwin at his museum.
Okay.
It was his job as a curator to put together an exhibit which demonstrated how creationism had been utterly destroyed by Darwin. So he managed to set up some sort of exhibit where there was a scale, and there was sort of all the Darwinist books on one side, there was the creationist books on the other side, and lo and behold, he ended up reading the creationist books. This man was not religious in any sense. He was not biased in any sense, but he read the creationist books, and he is one of many who said, look, they've actually got it right. Darwin got it wrong. You can read Darwinist
But there's not
biographies.
a fact that you can point to that shows that. I don't
There are
care
many facts. There are many facts.
if some guy went and said it pretends, like so many of them do. I was a card-carrying devout atheist until, until I looked at this book, and now I'm a believer. How many people get to sell that? And sell it they do, and make a
Right.
great living at that.
And he lost his job, so he definitely had some interest in there, right? Because
But
he was
again,
persecuted,
if he's
he
going to
was
say that
fired.
they're right, there has to be a reason that they're right. There has to be the evidence, the
And it's
fact.
not a bias. It's not a bias.
That's right. It's not a bias, because there has to be a fact that indicates the conclusion. It doesn't matter what your bias is. Just
Yeah,
show
that's
the
why I
data.
say read Thomas Kuhn's paradigm structure, because you seem to be totally unaware of how scientists, for the vast history of science, have held certain paradigms, and when people sort of attack that paradigm, they get blacklisted, and they don't get their jobs, they get persecuted, and they kind of are on the outside. And it takes quite a while for that paradigm to break, but it does eventually break. And
Okay, so
Darwinism has already been broken from the beginning. There is
and
not a
what
shred
was
of
broken?
evidence.
What was broken?
Darwinism has been broken from the beginning. Right?
Another assertion that I can prove that is absolutely wrong. I was going to tell the story. I can't remember the name of her name off the top of my head, but there was a young Earth creationist that went to work in a paleontological museum. No requirement that she dress anything up. That she was hired as a young Earth creationist, them knowing that she was a young Earth creationist, and she was the one that found the soft parts in dinosaur tissue. Right? I wish I could remember her name off the top of my head, but
Schweitzer.
anyway, Mary Schweitzer. Yes.
Schweitzer. Yeah.
So she is no longer a young Earth creationist. She's still a Christian, but she now understands evolution, and she gets very irritated at creationists misrepresenting her work as if it indicated a young Earth. Just another little point. You got your scientist who claims, "Oh, I saw a creationist, and now I think that creationism is real." Can't give a reason why. Gotcha. I've seen and read a number of these anti-science books, these claims made by creationists trying to poke holes in evolution, and they always fail. Darwinism, you don't even know what Darwinism is, was not broken from the beginning. Let's start with, what is Darwinism? And then we'll correct you on it being broken.
Well, obviously we're getting back into semantics here, but Darwinism
We're
is
not
the
in
belief
semantics.
system.
No, we're not.
Sure. Is there a strict definition for Darwinism?
Yeah. So the Darwinian mechanisms were natural and sexual selection, the things that Darwin came up with himself. It depends on the context of when you're speaking. In Europe, they would very often refer to Darwinism in a contrast with Lamarckism. So the type of evolution that involved natural selection was considered in the 19th century to be Darwinism. And
Right.
then in the 20th century, they integrated Mendelian genetics and mutations, and now it became the modern synthesis of Mendelo-Darwinian
Right.
evolution. And then in the 21st century, it's not neo-Darwinism anymore. It's not Darwinism of any sort at all. It's the extended evolutionary synthesis, I believe it. So
Well,
when you talk about Darwinism, the reason you use the word Darwinism is because you want to create the false illusion that evolution is a religious belief, because for whatever reason, it's like the only argument creationists have is to pretend that any beliefs or any position is a belief system, and that everything is based on faith, and that scientists must be arguing in defense of the faith of their religion. So I'm constantly being accused of being involved in the
yeah.
religion
So,
of evolutionism or religion
right.
of
So
Darwinism. It's all a lie.
well, first of all,
You
Michael
have to have a
Roos.
better argument than to pretend that I am you. I am not you. I
See,
don't have
again,
faith. I'm not beholden to a religion. Evolution is not a religion.
okay.
Correct that. And it's
So,
not
so Mike,
Darwinism.
so Michael Roos, who's probably one of the most famous evolutionary philosophers out there, has said that evolution is a religion. It serves the function of a religion. And I would like to go back and ask you, if you know your history, thank you for educating us on Lamarck and all that stuff, and how, by the way, the extended evolutionary synthesis had to be put in place because Darwinism, or the modern synthesis, doesn't actually prove anything. It has been proven fruitless, right?
No, it hasn't.
Natural
It
natural
has proven,
selection
according to the
plus
National Academy of
mutation.
Science, it
No.
has
A lot of
proven, according
scientists,
to the
a lot of
National Academy of Science, to be the foundation of modern biology. It's
yeah,
not fruitless. It's very productive.
no, did they accept the extended evolutionary synthesis to begin with? No. Why did
It,
people invoke the extended evolutionary synthesis?
because
You
of
should
the
answer
integration
that.
of more mechanisms.
No, because
The
the mechanisms in place from the modern synthesis didn't work.
But they did, and they do,
No,
and
no,
they change the nomenclature when they add more mechanisms
no.
to
So
it.
now they're trying
And
to
in this
find
case,
other reasons to make evolution work, such as epigenetics and other things. But the
well, so
modern
you're aware
synthesis,
already that they did in
sure, of
fact
course,
find
I'm aware
other
of all this.
mechanisms and
But the
integrate
modern
them into
synthesis
evolutionary
doesn't
theory.
work. It doesn't
But it
work.
does.
No, it doesn't. Why did they invoke the extended evolutionary synthesis?
Because they wanted to integrate endosymbiosis and genetic drift and a number of other mechanisms
So
into the
scientists weren't
body of
saying that the
evolutionary
modern
theory.
synthesis didn't work? They weren't saying that at all?
No, they weren't.
Oh, okay.
That was the limited information that they had at the time. So in
No.
the 19th century, they call it Darwinism, and then they integrate with genetics and mutations, and now it's neo-Darwinism, and now
And
they
that's
integrate endosymbiosis and genetic drift, among other things,
and
and
it's
it's the
all
modern evolutionary theory. But you know what it always is and always was? It's evolution. So we don't call it Darwinism, we don't call it the evolutionary synthesis, we call it
yeah.
evolution.
And that's why they
And it
say
was never
evolution
broken from the beginning.
and that's why they say evolution is a blunderbuss, because it's everything and it's nothing. You can
But
change the
it's a
definition
specific
as
thing.
often as you want.
It's descent with inherent modification. It is a theory of biodiversity according to changing allele frequencies in reproductive populations over many generations. That's the specific thing that it really is. It's not
So is that
everything
what
and nothing. It's that one thing.
is that what Darwin had in mind when he devised the theory of evolution? That
He
allele
didn't know about
frequencies differed?
genetics. He
Exactly.
didn't know
Thank
about
you.
genetics.
Right. And
He
genetics
knew that
actually
there was a
disproves
commonality.
evolution.
He predicted that there was heritable units of information being passed down from both parents, but he didn't know how that happened. And Mendel figured out how that happened. Mendel
Yeah, he didn't
solved
like
Darwin's
Mendel either,
dilemma.
did he?
What's that?
Yeah, and he didn't like Mendel's genetics either, did he? Darwin's
Darwin
didn't
didn't
like
know
Mendel's.
about Mendel's genetics.
No, but Darwin's followers didn't like Mendel's contribution, and they had to accept
Yes,
that.
they
But
did. That's why they praised him and integrated his studies into
sure,
evolution.
sure. But a lot of
So in a
geneticists say
growing
that,
body of knowledge.
right,
So
but
you
it's still
said,
wrong.
but it's still right. It's still
No,
demonstrably correct. So
no,
you
it's not
said that
demonstrable in any sense of the
it's
word.
demonstrable in every sense.
So give me a study
We
that
have
tried to
been
actually
using,
observe evolution in real time.
yes, we have.
Let's talk about Lenski's experiment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you know about Lenski's experiment? The
Of
only
course.
long-term experiment that actually tried to
Right.
demonstrate evolution in real time?
Biodiversity, multiple species of bacteria with different attributes. Yes.
Sure.
So directly observed macroevolution. So these are new species being developed.
Macroevolution.
Yes,
There
because
was not even
macroevolution,
one new protein formed.
but
That's
speciation is what
macroevolution to you?
to everyone
No,
who's teaching evolution,
no,
macroevolution is
no.
microevolution is variation within a species. Macroevolution is variation between species at or above the species level, which includes speciation, which has been directly observed and documented dozens of times, both in the lab and in naturally controlled conditions in the field. Yes, it has.
Not one new protein. How many proteins does it take to make up at least the most minute single-celled organism?
Does the classification of macroevolution require that it make a new protein, or does it
You would
require
think
that
that if
it
any
change
sort
at
of
this
real
at or above the
modification,
species level?
you would think that any sort of modification within any species, it would begin with a single protein. Yet we can't even watch that happen in real time.
So, are you going to admit that speciation has been observed? I mean,
Speciation what?
Hovind agrees to that. Speciation has been observed.
Yes, of course.
Okay, then macroevolution has been observed by definition.
Really?
Changes
No.
at and above the species level.
Well, my biology textbooks tell me that macroevolution is a change of sort of larger proportions than speciation. That's why there's a differentiation there, right?
It's
Otherwise, it
at
would
or
just be
above
known as speciation.
because it's at and above.
That was actually quite a clever word trick you used there, because macroevolution is used to denote the actual change that we think about when we talk about evolution. And you're telling me that mutations in a species that actually stays the same, that not one new protein has formed,
Except
is
that
now your new
it doesn't
definition?
stay the same. Except
Yeah,
it
there
doesn't
was
stay the same.
no new
There's
proteins.
different
It was
genotypes, there's different phenotypes,
sure,
there's all kinds of different varieties.
right, but not one new piece of functional genetic information that formed a new
What is a
protein.
functional piece of genetic information? Because
Something that codes for a brand new protein.
we do have that. It would take me some time to look it up. Again, if we were doing this as a written study, I would be able to, a written discussion, I would be able to show you those.
Yeah. Well, let's
I
get
can
back.
answer I can answer whatever you need if you give me the chance to go look it up, and I can show you that those things exist. By the way, the National Academy of Sciences says evolutionary science provides the foundation for modern biology. It has opened the door to entirely new types of medical, agricultural, and environmental research, and has led to the development of technologies that can help prevent and combat disease. And you're saying that it doesn't work. This is the National Academy of Science. And which church lied to you to tell you that it doesn't work?
I find this is just funny, because I mean, you can cite the National Academy of Science all you want, but again, you're forgetting.
But you can't, can you?
Well, I can
You
say
can't.
Ben
There's not a
Carson. Ben
scientific
Carson was one of the
organization that
top
supports you.
neurologists in your country, and he says evolution added zero to my medical practice, and he doesn't believe in evolution.
To a medical practice?
Yeah, he's a neurosurgeon. He's a very famous
Okay.
neurosurgeon, and he said evolution is not anything that I can use. It's nothing that I can see, nothing that I can contribute. It's a historical science, first of all, right?
Okay.
And
So,
name some of the
relevant.
predictions. Darwin made a lot of predictions in the origin of species,
fulfilled.
and none of them were fulfilled, right?
Yes, they were. The
No.
first one that was fulfilled while he was still alive. When he said that if dinosaurs, or excuse me, if birds had evolved from dinosaurs, then because he noticed that the feet of birds were exactly like the feet of dinosaurs, but that the hands looked like three-fingered hands of dinosaurs, but fused together. So he said that if birds had descended from dinosaurs, as Huxley was arguing, he said that we should find in the fossil record an intermediate form, a very primitive type of bird with reptile features, and specifically, it should have unfused wing fingers. That exact animal was found within 2 years of publication. That was Archaeopteryx, and there have since been many, 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 many more that fit the description that he gave. That's the first prediction that he made that was fulfilled. Another one that he made that was fulfilled was he said that because the chimpanzees and gorillas and so forth, most of the great apes were all in Africa. He said that our ancestor lineage would most likely be discovered in Africa, and he said that the transition should exist that would have intermediate traits, that roughly halfway between the modern apes that live there now, and the most primitive people that were known to his time. And I think that was Neanderthal. I think was the most primitive one that was known in his time. And 100 years later, we found buckets of them. So he was right about that too. Matter of fact, he made a lot of predictions that were correct. He didn't make all of them that were correct because he didn't understand genetics, granted, but he made a lot of predictions that were correct. And you're going to have to admit that Darwin made these predictions and they were fulfilled. He called for transitional species. We now have lists of transitional species in the thousands, and there are hundreds of just for vertebrates.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. Why did Stephen Jay Gould have to invoke punctuated equilibrium if there is such a thing as real, actual transitional fossils in the fossil record?
Because he was explaining why they weren't constant, why constant transitions were not being seen. So you have to study a little bit of paleontology to understand this. But when you have like a change in dynamics, when you have something coming out of the sea, for example, when you have something that is going from an aquatic to terrestrial, there's going to be a point where it's halfway in both of these, but it's not going to be as efficient as subsequent generations or previous ones that are more adept in either of these environments. So that's what he was talking about with punctuated equilibrium. That was also 50 years ago. And when he said that there weren't many transitional species, you have to admit that when he said there weren't many, that means there were some. And that was 50 years ago. And we've had a paleontological boon of transitional species since then.
Yeah. Anyways, that's not my area of expertise, but from what I've seen, there's actually a huge lack of, if anything, transitional fossils should outnumber regular fossils. And as Gould mentioned, and a lot of paleontologists have said, there is like zero transitional, and every time something is used as a transitional,
there's plenty of transitional species.
Okay, let's talk about the example you mentioned, Archaeopteryx. Do you still think that's a transitional fossil?
It's one of several that fit the description.
Right, because it's not used as a transitional fossil anymore, right? Because
yes, it is.
You find theropods. No, even biology textbooks from 10 years ago will admit that it's not a transitional fossil, right?
No, it is a transitional fossil, and by the definition,
well, let's look at
definition,
that. Yeah, let's look at that.
So it doesn't have to be the direct ancestor of anything alive today. It has to have traits intermediate between a given past form.
And Darwin predicted that we would find like multitudes of transitional fossils in the time to come, because that's what his theory.
He didn't actually. He said the opposite. He said it would be rare to find these, and he gave specific instructions on why that would be rare. But the fact is that we have found many of them.
Every time we find a supposed transitional fossil, further paleontological evidence sort of pushes that to the side. So we can play that game over. We can play that game over and over. So what about Tiktaalik? Is Tiktaalik still a transitional fossil?
Meaning it still has intermediate features? Yes, it still has.
Was it a predecessor? No, you can't point to any of these.
I just told you this. If in order to be transitional, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't.
See, now we're changing the goalpost again.
We're not. I said it doesn't have to be the direct ancestor. I told you it has to have intermediate features. It does not have to be the direct lineal ancestor. It just has to have intermediate species or intermediate features.
Well, of course, it's not the direct lineal ancestor, because paleontology has disproven that factor. So
no, they haven't.
Yes,
they haven't disproven. No, they have not disproven that. Why is nothing you say true? You have any idea have you been looking at the chat on this?
Okay,
People are calling you out. You are full of shit.
Sure. Yeah, and if I had followers like you who ate up everything I said, I'm sure they would say the same thing about you as well, right?
Okay, so let's have a written discussion like we were going to do. I have a forum for that, and you'll be able to see when you say that the X has never been discovered. I'll be able to show you that it has, and when you say, well, that doesn't count because it doesn't meet the definition, I can show you where the definition is posted on academic institutions to show you that it is, and then you can come up with the next bullshit excuse, and I can show you why you were already wrong about that before you said it.
Sure. Well, my point is that anytime something seems to refute an evolutionary fact, the goalposts change. And you didn't do this because this is what you've been taught.
Give me an example.
I just told you Archaeopteryx was used as a direct ancestor to theropod dinosaurs. Then they discovered theropod dinosaurs. Yes, it was.
No, it wasn't. Archaeopteryx was not a direct ancestor to theropod dinosaurs.
It was seen as that
by the people from Band. Birds Are Not Dinosaurs by
No.
John, what's his name, and Alan Fiducia, John Rubin and Alan Fiducia. They wanted to turn the phylogenetic tree upside down and say that dinosaurs evolved from birds. And so they wanted to try to readapt Archaeopteryx that way. But that's why they've lost all their credibility, because that's not the way. Archaeopteryx, it was predicted as a transition, given that it had intermediate features. It has those intermediate features, and so does Velociraptor, Oviraptor, Rhone avis, a whole shit ton of others also meet those transitional features. They don't have to be the direct lineal ancestor.
Yeah.
Never had to be.
Again, I understand. I'm glad you've taken a lot of time to look into this, and arguably you've probably taken more time to look into the paleontology than I have, and I'm thankful, and I'm happy to learn from you in any area that I can.
Dog.
But for me, the whole sort of framework that we're using to make a lot of these assertions is still pretty fuzzy, and I don't really know. I don't know how to trust a lot of these assertions that are coming out, because
then we should do this in writing. I can answer all your questions. I can show you the data. I can show it to you. The problem is that creationists don't want to know what the truth is.
I want to know
something else.
Sure, I'm happy to accept any sort of something that I can sink my teeth into. But what I'm actually,
what does that mean?
Going back, something that I can actually look at with my rational mind and say, yeah, I can't deny that. But the thing is,
okay. So you're saying if I show you the definition of transitional species, and you say, okay, well, it has these intermediate features. If I were to show it to you, not just from a scientific organization, but if I showed it to you from a creationist website that gives a scientific definition for transitional species, and it also describes those intermediate features the way I said, would you accept it then?
Like, if it appears that way, I will not hide my feelings to you, and I will tell you very bluntly, it does appear that way to me.
Very good. Then I can show you hundreds of transitional species just with invertebrates.
Sure. Here's the kicker, though. When we're talking about evolutionary timescales and geological timescales and frameworks that we're working within, we're sort of at the periphery here. We're discussing things that may or may not be true. It's a historical science. You can't really say
you were discussing things that may or may not be true. I'm showing things that we have positive data for.
Sure, you're just going back and forth, because I'm telling you I don't see a lot of evidence for that, right? But I'm saying these are.
You're telling me you don't study paleontology, so you don't see a lot of paleontology.
I probably study it. Yeah, I have studied paleontology, but I'm thankful that you.
So when you mentioned that there was no transitional species, for example, the last expedition that I went on was nothing but transitional species. Everything we found was a transitional.
Again, we can come back to that. I don't believe that there is any actual transitional fossils. Like I said, Darwin predicted there would be more.
What would you call something that's not quite a reptile but not quite a mammal?
Okay, first of all, to make the jump from reptile to mammal involves a whole lot of molecular and biological changes that are not possible.
What if they're all there and indicated not just in the fossil, but also in the genome?
So tell me,
and also
this is what I'm always curious about. You really think that a fossil that may look like again, I'm not familiar with the fossil that we're discussing, but do you really think that a fossil that appears that way is evidence of mass biological change between a warm-blooded animal and a cold-blooded animal that has myriad biological systems that we can't even demonstrate how one protein can be formed through random mutation and natural selection?
Yes,
and you're telling me that, okay, this is what I was saying.
I can show you the studies for that too.
My original point is this: evolution presupposes that animals can change on a large scale.
Evolution doesn't presuppose.
It does. It's not a fact.
It's not a fact. It is a fact. It is a fact.
It's not a fact. No, it's not.
It is a fact. We can demonstrate it, watch it in real time. We can manipulate it. We have used evolutionary principles throughout the entire history of agriculture and animal husbandry.
Yeah, you can learn about speciation, adaptation, those kinds of things. Evolution
and what is
in the broad
adaptation?
sense.
And what is adaptation?
I'm talking about the real definition of macroevolution.
The real definition of macroevolution is...
I'm talking about change from one family of biological organisms to another family of biological organisms.
Wrong, that's not, no. Speciation and above.
Okay, you and I both, nobody disagrees with adaptation, speciation. That's something
you don't know what adaptation is. If you knew what the definition of adaptation is, it's biodiversity through natural selection. It is evolution. That's what that is. Evolution by natural selection. That's what the word adaptation means academically.
Okay, if you think that's evolution, I'm an evolutionist. Okay, I'm talking about
You
common
probably
descent.
are. You
No, I'm
probably
not.
are. You just don't know it.
No, I'm not. There's
You
no.
are, because if you already accept that biological
I'm a
organisms and populations,
microevolutionist. I'm a microevolutionist.
but
Let's
you
be
don't
there.
understand.
Okay.
It goes beyond that. I can show you how far it goes, and
You
you
can't even
will.
show me how one new protein is formed.
Yes, I can. If you go
You
into a
just
venue
told
where I
me
can
that
show you the
Lenski's
data,
experiment was macroevolution.
because it's an origin of new species,
That
different
that
species,
was
a
the
variety of them,
experiment that tried to demonstrate evolution in real time. It
and
was
it
a complete
did.
it was a
It was
failure,
a complete
complete
success.
failure.
Yes, it showed a
No,
variation
and
of
it proved the
new
ID
species with
scientists
different traits,
completely correct because their
with novel
predictions.
traits.
No,
So you
no,
don't just sit there and lie to me. I know what these studies
no,
are.
no. Evolution on a broad scale has to begin with at least one new protein forming.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, that is
It's allele
impossible.
frequencies, variation of allele frequencies.
Yeah,
So
genetic drift
when you
can't
have a
create new
reproductive
functional
population,
proteins. It
when you
doesn't
have
create
a
new functional
reproductive
proteins.
population, and you
No.
see that population has divided into two different genotypic or phenotypic subsets, you're going to
No.
be able to see the genetic difference between them. You're going to be able to identify the difference between these groups by their genetics. That is evolution by definition. It doesn't matter if they produce a different protein.
Yes,
Now,
it does.
they usually will. I'm not familiar about the Lenski study about the bacteria that he's using, whether any of those bacteria produce new proteins. I would have to look that up, and I don't want to
You
say
just said it was a complete success, though.
Yes, it was, because it produced a variety of different species. He wanted to show that evolution was observable in real time, that macroevolution could be observed in real time, and he demonstrated that. Now, you
No.
don't want to accept that because you don't know what
No.
macroevolution is, and you don't know what adaptation is, and you don't know what Darwinism is, and you don't know what evolution is, but you know better than all of the experts, right?
No. This is just basic logic, Aaron. You're kind of switching definitions back and forth. Macroevolution.
Switch the definition. I'm not the one switching the definitions. You
No.
are the one that's switching the definitions. I can show you
Okay.
where they are academically, where they are defined, and this is what they mean and have always meant. I can show you the documentation for it. You can't show me any of the documentation for how evolutionists are prohibited from saying anything whatever match the Bible. Bullshit. That prohibition doesn't exist.
Well, I tried to tell you, you cut me off like 30 times. Okay, people are getting fired for
People
disagreeing
might be
with
getting fired
Darwinist.
if they're going out of their ethics, if they're trying to teach something that isn't true,
No.
if they want to teach religion instead of science, and if they're using bogus science, because that's what creationism is and always was. Frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. All creationism has. That's it. There is not one actual fact you can show to be true that is also indicative of the creationist position. There isn't one. You can misread a study, but that's not going to qualify.
Okay, I think you need to familiarize yourself with how scientific culture works and how biases work, because you're assuming that creationism isn't science, that's not science. So I guess
absolutely,
you would.
it's not science.
Sure.
And I can show you the proof.
So when did science start then? When did people becoming and start doing science? When did that happen?
That there's in stages, beginning around again the 7th century BCE. But when we have something that I tried to show you before, when you have a document that you have to sign, that you are never going to question this conclusion, that all of your research must back this conclusion, that's exactly the opposite of science.
Again, you're setting up a straw man, another huge straw man.
Not a straw man. I can show you the documentation. Answers in Genesis actually does make their scientists pay.
I'm not talking about Answers in Genesis. I'm talking about academic institutions. Okay, and your straw man was very clear there.
Academic institutions don't make their scientists say that you have to support the status quo.
No, they just fire you if you don't. Okay, it doesn't have to be a legal document.
Your data, as creationists have to do, because creationism is
nobody's fudging data. They are coming to different conclusions.
Creationists always fudge data.
They are thinking differently.
One study from a creationist that isn't fudged data.
They are thinking differently, and that's the intellectual crime.
Not thinking at all. It's all bias. They have to come up with some argument, any justification, any apologetic that could possibly support their conclusion that they're determined they're going to get to at the onset.
Again,
they are never allowed. The creationist is not allowed to say, you know what, this actually qualifies as a transitional species, so we'll put it on the list of transitional species. No.
Again, if you want to talk about transitional fossils, you can just go to Stephen Jay Gould. Just read his book about transitional fossils.
I did.
If you think it's a creationist sort of ploy here, okay? Right? There was a
Yeah, I
reason
know
there
what
was
the
a
creation
divergence.
ploy is. I can demonstrate it. I can show it to you. You can
Sure.
show it to me when you
Yeah.
try to show me evidence on your side, and I'll say, okay, well, here's the falsified argument that you're
No,
using.
you won't
Like
you
I
won't
said,
even entertain the thought that people are getting you in your mind. If people think differently and think Darwin is wrong, that's a breach of ethics to you. To me, that tells
no, it isn't. If they can show that
you're not
Darwin is wrong,
intellectually honest.
if they can show that Darwin is wrong, that means something else.
Yeah,
But they
they
can't.
have, but in your
But
mind,
they
you'll never
haven't.
accept that.
They've never shown. No,
Of course,
Darwin was wrong about the genetics thing because, as I said, he didn't know. He was trying.
he was
He came
wrong
up with
about
the idea of
everything.
gemmules.
He was
He
wrong about
wasn't wrong about
everything.
everything. He got
He was.
the Archaeopteryx right. He got the Australopiths right. He was right about the transitional species being discovered by the hundreds. Yes, he was right. You're lying about it, but he
So
was
if I
right.
can show you philosophers of science and scientists who say that Darwin got those things wrong, will you accept that as well?
We're going to have a consensus here. You're going to find me some guy.
Again, you won't acknowledge
what
people are saying.
All we have is this guy saying Darwin is wrong. We don't have the data showing that Darwin was wrong, and it doesn't matter.
We do have the data.
And Darwin was 19th century.
But the thing is, you won't accept
Darwin
that
was
because you're
19th
stuck.
century. We have learned a whole lot more about evolution since Darwin that he couldn't have imagined. Darwin is not the figurehead here. He's just the guy who discovered the process.
He is the figurehead. He's the symbol of it.
No, he is not the figurehead. I just corrected you. Oh, okay, we're done. We're done. If all you're going to do is contradict me and lie and make baseless assumptions, and all of your assumptions are baseless, then we've got nowhere else to go. I suggest we have a written discussion where I can show you the data and point out when you failed to show any data supporting your point, because you can't. There is not any data to support you. Period.
Yeah. I have the feeling that even if I do show you data, you're just going to dress it up as some sort of, you're not going to accept it, to be honest. I don't think you're willing to accept anything that contravenes your view of reality.
Okay. That's why we have peer review process, right? If
peer review is not an infallible arbiter of what's real. Okay.
Now we need infallibility. Where you're coming from a religious perspective,
no, but that's your standard.
Fallibility.
That's your standard. That's your standard, right? Is peer review.
If you want to make a statement, we have to be able to show that it's correct. Yes.
Right. Well, what if
I'm not going to buy it just because some guy said so?
What if things are true?
Not just that some guy said so, but why that guy said so.
Sure.
As I said, I don't care what you believe. All that matters is why you believe it. Mm-hmm. Show me the data. And you can't.
Right. But here's the thing that you fail to acknowledge. If your standard is peer review, and I'm telling you that scientists who are of the same acumen as any other scientists out there will submit things for peer review, but they will not get accepted based on the ideology behind or what the paper might implicate. And you're telling me that doesn't exist? When that's been amply demonstrated.
Once again says there's not a single geochronological technique supporting biblical/creationist timeline, nor a single article that can get past peer review. This isn't a conspiracy. It's because they're demonstrably wrong.
Right. So
allow me to demonstrate that for you.
Let me give you an example of what I'm telling you.
If we do a written, I don't want to call it a debate. Let's do a written discussion where I'm going to reason with you. And I can remember, I want everybody in the audience to know, I invited to do a written discussion to begin with so that I could show this guy the data. And then because you have a belief system that depends on apologetics, you are determined to dismiss whatever the hell I said. And you've done it over and over and over and over again. You won't admit that Archaeopteryx is a transitional species. You won't admit that Darwin was right in his predictions. You keep shaking your head. So you are going to continue the lie.
No, I'll look that up. From what I've seen,
Archaeopteryx is a transitional species then?
I will accept the appearance of Archaeopteryx as a transitional species. Because from what I've seen,
all a transitional species is the appearance.
From what I've seen, Archaeopteryx is not even used as a transitional fossil anymore.
But it is.
Okay. Well, in my biology textbooks that are not Christian, it says it's not a transitional fossil. Okay?
But it is. It has intermediate features. Do your books give a definition for what a transitional species is?
Of course it does.
Then show me the definition, and we'll show it, and where they say that it doesn't meet that definition.
Sure.
Again, it has to be a written discussion. It's
Yeah.
pointless to just listen to assertions where you tell me that many scientists are welcome. No, fuck, they're not.
So if you can acknowledge that basic fact, how can I trust anything you're telling me right now? Why should I even engage
Because I
with
can
you?
show you that I'm right.
You can't, because
I
it's
can.
demonstrable. It's
I just
demonstrable.
told you it's demonstrable, so I can show it to you. That's why I want to do it in writing. So you want to
Okay.
commit? You want to say that
Again,
this study? Okay, here's the
here's the
study.
baseless assertion that you're making. You are assuming you can demonstrably prove to me, as if you're everywhere at all times and that you have infinite knowledge, that you can prove to me somehow that it is not happening, that scientists are getting fired for their beliefs, as if you somehow are in every institution,
Again, if the
in every
scientist
office.
Being unethical,
I can't take what you're
lying,
saying seriously.
if the scientist is being unethical, or if the scientist is lying to the students, because I've seen cases where
See?
people claim that they were being
You're talking
fired
about ethics now.
Yeah, I've seen cases where people claim that they were being fired for their religious beliefs, but in fact, it was because of their unethical behavior. I get that. We'll have to look at that as a case by case basis. But what I'm talking about is when you say that that this was never discovered, I can show you that it was discovered. When you say that this was never that the prediction never came true, I can show you where the prediction had come true. I can show you the documentation. When you say it's not defined this way, I can show you the academic definitions. I can show you all of the things you need to see.
Sure.
And you will try to run away because you don't care what the truth is. You want to believe something else.
Okay. First of all, you still will not acknowledge what I'm saying, or you won't even entertain the thought that it could be true. And you're asserting that you can prove to me, like that's a wild claim, that you can prove.
No, I can prove it to your satisfaction. I can.
Okay, sure.
If you would engage in the Socratic interaction that I'm talking about, if you would actually answer the questions, you'll see.
Okay, and if I can bring a scientist to speak with you who tells you that they were a leading scientist that got fired for simply disagreeing with Darwinism, what's your response?
And they won't be able to produce the fact either. Bring your scientist, and I'll chew his ass for not being able to bring a single fact that supports your position, not one that is actually true.
Now you're jumping ships again, because you're saying that now you're bringing it back to an evidential argument. That's not
you're pretending that I'm the one not paying attention. You're not paying attention.
No. See, now you're jumping back. No, I'm telling you, like, bar none, nothing else beyond the fact that scientists feel pressure to align themselves with Darwinism, even if they don't believe in it. Evolution, whatever you want. Okay.
This is not a belief. You don't have nobody cares what you believe. Once again, this may sound familiar. It may be like I've said it a half a dozen times already. We only care why you believe it. Show me the data so I can figure out whether I should believe it too.
Well, again,
you can't do that.
Okay, let's look at some of the transitional things, and let's see if Darwin did make a correct prediction. Sure, let's give him that. But again, evolution.
And then I'm going to demonstrate for you what evolution is.
But more fundamentally than any of that, you need to prove to me, even in the most basic sense, that evolution can create new proteins, new genetic functional information. Okay. At the level that would theoretically perhaps create a new body plan.
And just to keep you from moving the goalposts, we're going to have academic definitions where you have to cite, okay, this is the academic definition, and you can't just change it so that when I answer your question,
and just let the record state, because when we talk about this again, if we do on written whatever format it is, let the record state that you said Lenski proved successfully macroevolution.
Yep, okay? By the definition of multiple species in that direct observation in the lab.
Yeah, yes. And let's also bring back the studies we talked about that point to a 6,000-year-old mitochondrial Eve that you said doesn't actually prove anything, that they were just jumping around to different mutational rates.
No, that's not what I said. I said that there were multiple Eves, and that was only talking about the most recent one. And you said there was only one, and then you read the damn thing and it said most recent, didn't it? And then you wouldn't admit when you'd made a mistake.
No, I admit it says that. It obviously says that, but you weren't listening to what I was saying, obviously, which was they have to say that, right?
No, they don't have to say that. That was another assertion you made without backing. There is no requirement that you have
Okay.
to back up the no, because we
All
are not
right.
answers in Genesis. We don't make you sign the thing that you're going to support the religious perspective like they do,
No,
like
no, you just
you
fire.
do.
You just fire us.
Scientists don't do that.
No, you just fire them,
Science does
right?
not even allow that.
Yeah, you talk about science as if it's some sort of concrete entity. Science is much more
No, I
fluid
don't.
and
No, I
vague
don't.
than what you're
I even
presupposing
brought
it
up
is.
I even brought up John Rubin and Alan Fiducia, who completely defy evolution or scientific ethics by lying
Yeah,
to people in it with a religious paradigm. So
yeah.
yeah, you can have shitty scientists, and there's two I just named.
So what about all the modern evolutionary biologists who say that like what we think creates new species and new functional body plans is garbage? You know, guys like James Shapiro, other biologists that basically
Then
says
show
it doesn't
me the
work.
data, and I will give me your assertions. I'll be able to show that you're wrong. I'll be able to show
Yeah.
you what evolution is. I'll be able to show you that it really works. We'll have the interaction so that you can see that evolution really does work. And you will have to admit that these predictions were made by the theory, and they were satisfied. Those predictions came true. We got this, and then you're going to realize on your own that, hey, I was going to refer this guy to some guy some Mooney who got his degree because he wanted to challenge Darwinism from within, and I probably shouldn't cite that guy. I now understand that evolution is really a thing.
Wait,
That's what will happen.
so in your definition of science, do you think if somebody makes a correct prediction that entirely proves their theory? Is that what you think?
No, science doesn't prove things. The absolute conviction is on the religious field, which is absolute conviction tends to mislead, which is why religion is absolutely convinced and absolutely wrong. But what science does is look at whether it's supported or not supported. And if it's not supported, then it's not even worthy of serious consideration. So if you can't show me the data, positive claims require positive evidence. What is
Again,
asserted
that's
without
just why
evidence
I
may be
encourage
dismissed
you.
without evidence.
Yeah, in the meantime, you should probably go and read Thomas Kuhn, go read Michael Planey, go read some guys who will sort of burst your bubble
Okay.
on what science is, because there is
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of
because
bias, there's
I
a lot
don't
of
know what science is.
presuppositions.
The young Earth creationist knows what science
Yeah,
is.
just like
The
the
guy
young
who
Earth
didn't know what
creationists.
any of the definitions were that we were just talking about for
Yeah,
the
just
last
like the
hour.
young Earth creationists
The
who had
guy who
to sort
thinks
of
it's all a big
basically
conspiracy.
give you a lesson in semantics and language philosophy. So
Okay,
just
we're
because
done.
somebody is a young Earth creationist doesn't mean that they're somehow unable. Like I believe you've made a number of baseless assertions, and I don't think
Yeah,
you've
but
accepted that.
I can prove that I didn't, and you
Yeah,
did, and you
sure,
still are.
right.
So I will give you the link. How can I get you that link? I'll send you the link the same way I sent this to the forum where I do these discussions. Bear in mind, I'm going to be in the bush for the next 2 weeks, and I
Yeah,
will have little or no cell service. And that goes for everybody else listening. I'm going to be in a place that is so remote that I don't think we're even going to have a cell signal except maybe 1 or 2 days we're there. So if I don't respond to you, understand that's why I'm off the grid.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
thank you everybody for tuning in. I still think it was productive, even if it was a little squirrely. But hey, you can't expect it to go any better than this. We have a belief system that needs to be defended, because you got to believe it, whether it's true or not. And then you have science who doesn't want to believe things that are not true and don't even want to believe things that are true. We would rather know them or understand them. So I am out.
All right. God bless you, Aaron. Aaron, thank you for having me. And